The auditorium lights dim just enough to create an atmosphere of tension, the kind of electric silence that makes an audience lean forward in their seats. Michelle Obama stood at center stage, dressed in her signature elegance, smiling as the crowd erupted into thunderous applause. Cameras flashed, the television broadcast ticker at the bottom of the screen reading, "Exclusive, Michelle Obama speaks on leadership and legacy." Her voice rang out with practiced warmth, smooth, deliberate, every syllable soaked in confidence. And then, in a line that seemed scripted to crown her above all others, she declared with striking clarity, "I am America's princess. No one can take that away." The room froze. Some cheered reflexively, while others murmured in shock at the audacity of the statement. Social media feeds lit up instantly, tweets flying, Instagram stories posting, TikTok clips being cut and reshared within seconds. Hashtag America's Princess was already trending. The mainstream anchors smiled tightly, clearly ready to amplify her words into the evening news cycle. But on the far side of the stage sat Karoline Leavitt, invited as the so-called conservative voice of balance, a token presence meant to nod to fairness. She leaned forward slowly, eyes narrowing, her hand brushing the small cross pendant on her necklace. The audience noticed her movement, whispers rippling through the crowd. Unlike Michelle, Karoline wasn't cloaked in the aura of legacy or family dynasty. She carried herself with a defiant kind of stillness, the energy of someone who had been underestimated one too many times and was no longer willing to let others write her story. Behind the cameras, producers were already debating in hushed tones, "Do we cut her off if she responds? This is Michelle's show, don't let it derail." But Karoline's presence was undeniable, her body language radiating an unspoken challenge. Her eyes met Michelle's across the stage, and in that silent exchange, the crowd sensed what was coming, a clash that would not be polite, would not be rehearsed, and would not be easily forgotten. The first 30 seconds had set the stage for something explosive, the kind of viral moment people wouldn't just watch, they would replay, dissect, and argue about for weeks. America wasn't about to witness another polished speech. They were about to witness a battle. The silence after Michelle's bold proclamation didn't last long. The crowd broke into scattered applause, a mix of loyal supporters clapping enthusiastically and skeptics folding their arms with raised eyebrows. The stage lights gleamed off Michelle's confident smile as if the entire evening was hers to command. She gestured gracefully toward the cameras, knowing millions were watching at home. "America," she continued, "needs grace, dignity, and vision. And I've carried that for years." Her words rolled across the audience like a rehearsed coronation. But Karoline wasn't clapping. She leaned back slightly in her chair, arms crossed, her expression calm but unyielding. The camera, sensing the tension, cut to her face for a brief second, and the image exploded across Twitter feeds, Karoline staring with the icy stillness of someone sharpening a blade in her mind. A journalist whispered to his neighbor, "That look could end careers." Michelle noticed. Her smile faltered just enough to reveal irritation. "Of course," she added with a sly undertone, "not everyone here understands what true leadership looks like. Some are still learning." The audience gasped at the thinly veiled jab. Eyes darted immediately toward Karoline. The producers in the booth panicked, waving frantically at each other, "Don't let it escalate, keep it light." But it was too late. The crowd wanted a fight. Karoline straightened her posture, finally leaning forward into the microphone. Her voice was steady, low, deliberate. "With all due respect, Michelle, America doesn't need a princess. We need honesty. We need courage. And we need someone who remembers that titles don't make you worthy, your actions do." The auditorium erupted. Half the crowd gasped audibly, the other half broke into applause. The camera zoomed in, catching Michelle's sudden blink, the subtle tightening of her jaw. The broadcast anchors scrambled in their earpieces, trying to spin the narrative before it got away from them. But the energy had shifted. For the first time all evening, Michelle was no longer in full control of the room. Social media roared, "Did Karoline just challenge Michelle Obama on her own stage? Hashtags collided, hashtag no princess trended alongside hashtag stand with Karoline. And within minutes, clips of Karoline's sharp words flooded TikTok with captions like, "When truth cuts deeper than titles." The fight had been sparked, and everyone knew it wasn't just another polite debate. This was a showdown, an unplanned collision of two forces, one clinging to a crown of legacy and another determined to shatter it. Michelle's attempt to reclaim composure came swiftly. She flashed her polished smile again, leaned into the mic, and said, "It's easy to speak of courage when you've never had the responsibility of carrying an entire nation's expectations on your shoulders." The crowd murmured in approval, her supporters clapping loudly. She wanted to remind everyone of her legacy, the years she spent as First Lady, the symbolism she carried. She was trying to shift the narrative back to her authority, back to her image as untouchable. But Karoline didn't blink. She held Michelle's gaze like a challenger in a prize fight, unshaken, refusing to let the weight of titles or past glories silence her. Slowly, she leaned forward again, her tone firmer, cutting through the room like glass breaking. "You speak of expectations, Michelle, but expectations mean nothing when they're betrayed. America expected leadership, what it got was pageantry. America expected accountability. What it got was speeches about hope while corruption deepened behind closed doors." The words hit like a hammer. Gasps rippled through the auditorium. Michelle's smile faltered again, the mask cracking for a second time. A few audience members began clapping, cautiously at first, then louder. Some even stood up, shaking their heads at Michelle while cheering Karoline. The moderators, clearly panicking, attempted to cut in. "Ladies, let's keep this civil," one of them stammered, but neither woman gave them attention. The duel had taken on a life of its own. Michelle, visibly tightening her grip on the microphone, snapped back. "How dare you? You think you can dismiss years of sacrifice, of service, with a cheap soundbite?" Her voice carried anger now, the carefully measured tone slipping. Karoline's response was immediate and devastating. "It's not a soundbite, it's the truth. And the truth is, no one here elected you a princess, no one crowned you America's royalty. You don't own this country, the people do." The crowd erupted. Some booed Michelle. Others roared their approval for Karoline, chanting her name. On social media, live stream comments exploded, hashtags multiplied, hashtag no crown, hashtag people first, hashtag Karoline versus Michelle. Even mainstream outlets, hesitant at first, began acknowledging the shift in tone, Obama camp rattled by fiery challenge. And in that moment, everyone watching knew this wasn't just about two women sparring. It was about a clash of visions, between a legacy grasping to hold on to symbolic power and a challenger demanding real accountability. By now, the air in the auditorium was thick with tension. Michelle Obama, normally so adept at commanding a stage, found herself cornered in real time. She had expected applause, deference, and respect. Instead, Karoline had peeled back the polished veneer, forcing the crowd to confront a question many were too timid to raise: who really owns America's voice, the people, or those who call themselves its royalty? Michelle shifted uneasily, her hand gripping the microphone stand like a shield. She straightened her posture, raised her chin, and attempted to regain control. "You may try to shout louder, Karoline, but history is on my side. The people remember what I've done for this country, and they know where I stand." Her voice was steady but sharp, laced with indignation. Karoline didn't flinch. She leaned slightly forward, her eyes burning with conviction. "History won't save you if it's written in half-truths," she said. "And tonight, people don't want pageantry, they want honesty. Tell them, Michelle, what did all that symbolism really deliver? Safer streets? Affordable lives? A stronger nation? Or just best-selling books and lecture tours?" The reaction was instantaneous. The crowd broke into a mix of cheers, claps, and murmurs. Michelle's supporters tried to drown out the noise with chants of her name, but they were scattered, weaker. Karoline's words had cut too deeply. Michelle attempted a counterattack. "You think you're brave standing there, but you're reckless. You have no idea what it takes to lead, no idea what it costs to hold together a fractured nation. Karoline delivered her line like a blade, and you have no idea what it means to tell the truth when it's inconvenient. Leadership isn't about titles, it's about accountability. That's why the people are listening to me, not bowing to you. The audience exploded, louder than before. The chant of Karoline, Karoline grew, echoing through the hall. Cameras zoomed in on Michelle's expression, a mix of anger and disbelief. For the first time, she looked shaken, her carefully rehearsed lines useless against the raw force of Karoline's conviction. On social media, clips of the exchange were already going viral. A tweet read, "Karoline just turned Michelle's crown into dust." Another, "This isn't a debate anymore, it's a reckoning." The moderators, red-faced, looked helpless. What was supposed to be a controlled, polished conversation had erupted into a symbolic showdown, a torch-passing moment where the old guard was visibly losing ground. And in that hall, everyone could feel it, Michelle's words had lost their weight. Karoline had seized the narrative, and she wasn't letting go. Michelle Obama inhaled deeply, steadying herself as the noise of the crowd refused to fade. Her years of experience in politics and public speaking had taught her how to weather storms, but this one was different. This wasn't a polite heckler she could silence with charm, nor a reporter she could deflect with practiced talking points. This was Karoline, unyielding, sharp, and fearless. "Let me be crystal clear," Michelle began, her voice ringing with the authority she had once wielded effortlessly from the White House stage. "I didn't come here to spar with someone looking for clicks or headlines. I came here to talk about the future of America. And if we reduce this conversation to insults and half-truths, the only losers will be the American people." The line landed well with her loyalists, who clapped and shouted in support. Michelle squared her shoulders, clearly trying to reclaim the moral high ground. For a moment, it seemed she might have steadied herself. But Karoline didn't let her breathe. She stepped closer, narrowing the space between them, her words cutting through the applause like glass through silk. "Insults?" she asked, almost laughing. "No, Michelle. I don't deal in insults. I deal in receipts. The people didn't elect you to be a queen. They didn't hand you the right to crown yourself America's princess. You claimed it, and you profited from it. That's not leadership. That's entitlement dressed as virtue." The crowd gasped, and then roared. The energy shifted instantly. Michelle's attempt to pivot the narrative back to the future had been demolished by Karoline's precision strike. Michelle's expression hardened. "And what have you done, Karoline? What have you built? I carried the weight of this country on my back for 8 years while you were nowhere to be found." Karoline's reply was devastating. "You carried the perks, not the weight. And what I've built is harder than anything you could imagine, because I built it without power, without the safety net of a presidential name, and without a media empire shielding me. Everything I've earned with nothing but grit and truth. Can you say the same?" The audience erupted into deafening applause. Even those who had started the evening firmly in Michelle's corner were now whispering, exchanging glances that betrayed a shift. The once untouchable Michelle Obama was on defense, every attempt at dominance countered and shattered by Karoline's fearless precision. Social media exploded in real time. Headlines flashed across phones: "Karoline crushes Michelle's crown in primetime showdown." Hashtags like #TruthOverTitles and #Karoline vs Michelle began trending. The narrative had spun beyond Michelle's control. For the first time, Michelle's voice faltered. Her authority, her aura, cracks had formed. And Karoline wasn't finished. Michelle Obama's smile thinned, but her composure cracked only for a second. She leaned against the podium, trying to reclaim her steady tone. "You can throw stones all night, Karoline, but the truth is simple: Americans know me. They know my service, my sacrifice, my devotion. And they will not be swayed by the noise of someone trying to tear down what we built." Her supporters cheered again, but this time the applause sounded forced, thinner, as if the crowd itself sensed the weight of the exchange had shifted. Cameras zoomed in on Michelle's face, catching the flicker of unease in her eyes. She was still fighting, but she was no longer dictating the terms. Karoline let the applause die before speaking, deliberately holding the silence. Her voice dropped into a calm but devastating register. Service? Sacrifice? Michelle, you lived in the most powerful house on earth while everyday Americans were scraping by. You turned the role of First Lady into a branding empire, selling books, documentaries, and speeches at hundreds of thousands of dollars a night. That isn't sacrifice. That's profit. And the people watching know it. The crowd's reaction was electric. Some shouted in disbelief, others applauded wildly. What Karoline had done was not just challenge Michelle's narrative, she had exposed the gap between Michelle's self-image and the public's lived reality. Michelle's lips pressed tight. She tried a counterattack. You have no idea the pressure of being in that position, of being under a microscope every single day. I survived it with grace, and I never stopped fighting for the American people, especially women and young girls who saw themselves in me. Karoline pounced. Yes, they saw themselves in you, and what did you show them? That power belongs to those born close to it. That leadership is inherited, not earned. But here's the truth, Michelle, young women don't need a princess to look up to. They need proof that anyone, without privilege, without fame, can rise. That's what I represent. Not a fairy tale, but a reality. The studio exploded. Even neutral spectators were on their feet. Michelle tried to interject, but her voice was drowned out by the eruption of cheers for Karoline. At that moment, the optics told the story better than any line could. The America's Princess persona had cracked under the weight of raw authenticity. Social media live streams replayed Karoline's words in loop, commentators cutting in with phrases like, "This is the moment Michelle lost control," and "Karoline just ripped apart 8 years of mythmaking." Michelle stood frozen, her hands gripping the podium, her eyes flashing between frustration and disbelief. For the first time in her long career, she wasn't just losing a debate, she was losing her aura. And Karoline, sensing the weakness, pressed forward with even sharper precision. Michelle tried to steady herself, raising a hand as if she could calm both the crowd and her own nerves. "Karoline, you're playing a dangerous game," she said, her voice firmer than before but betraying a tremor. "This isn't about privilege or titles. This is about credibility. And frankly, I don't think you've earned the right to lecture me about what leadership looks like. I've been on the front lines of history. You've been chasing headlines." It was a sharp line, classic Michelle. The audience gasped, half in admiration, half in tension, but Karoline didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Instead, she let Michelle's words hang in the air like smoke, and then cut through them with the precision of a blade. "History?" Karoline shot back, her voice ringing out with the confidence of someone who knew the audience was already with her. "Michelle, history isn't made by clinging to power. It's made by telling the truth when it's unpopular, by standing up when the crowd is booing, not clapping. You may have been on the stage of history, but you were protected by it, guarded, scripted, polished. I didn't inherit a stage, I had to fight for a microphone. And the reason people are listening now is because I'm not selling a legacy, I'm demanding accountability." The crowd erupted. Even Michelle's loyalists were visibly shaken by the directness of Karoline's words. The cameras caught younger audience members chanting Karoline's name. Clips began to spread online instantly, captions reading, "Karoline dismantles Michelle's crown," and "No script, just fire." Michelle forced a smile, but it looked pained, almost brittle. She attempted another pivot, accountability? "You talk as if I owe the American people an apology for inspiring them. For giving them hope. That's what leadership is, hope. And I won't apologize for it." Karoline stepped forward, her tone steady but sharp enough to silence the entire room. "Hope without honesty is manipulation. You turned hope into a brand. You turned leadership into royalty. And now you want to cling to the title of America's Princess. But Michelle, the American people never crowned you, they endured you. The line detonated. The crowd's reaction was instantaneous: cheers, gasps, and the kind of roar that made it impossible for Michelle to respond immediately. Commentators online declared it the knockout blow. Even the camera cut briefly to Michelle's face, her expression frozen somewhere between disbelief and indignation. For the first time, Michelle looked cornered, her polished armor cracked wide open. Karoline had not only stripped her claim to royalty but had reframed the entire debate. Michelle was no longer the inspirational icon. She was a symbol of entitlement, and Karoline had just exposed it in front of the entire nation. The moderator tried to interject, sensing Michelle's silence stretching too long, but the damage was done. Social media lit up with one phrase: "She endured you." Michelle finally managed to recover her composure, but it was clear the balance of the stage had shifted beyond her control. She leaned forward, gripping the podium as if to anchor herself. "Karoline," she said, her voice sharper now, almost defensive, "you think this is about titles or crowns? It's not, it's about respect. And you, quite frankly, have shown none, not to me, not to this audience, not to the institution of public service itself. You've confused hostility with honesty. And if you want America to endure anything, it will be the consequences of this recklessness." It was a hard swing, a last attempt to frame Karoline as dangerous, disrespectful, even reckless. The crowd gave a few scattered claps, mostly from Michelle's loyalists, but the energy had shifted so dramatically that the line barely landed. Karoline didn't hesitate. She walked a step closer, refusing to let Michelle reclaim ground. "Respect," she repeated, her tone sharp but calm, her eyes locked on Michelle like steel. "Respect is earned, not demanded. Respect is telling the truth, even when it shatters the illusion. And the truth is, America is tired of being told to respect people who've turned service into self-promotion. They're tired of polished speeches and staged empathy. They don't want a princess. They don't want a queen. They want leaders who bleed with them, sweat with them, and fight with them. You stood above them. I stand with them." The audience erupted. The line struck like lightning. Young people in the crowd leapt to their feet, chanting her name. Hashtags began trending instantly, #StandWithCaroline and #NotAPrincess. News producers whispered furiously into headsets, realizing they were watching a cultural moment unfold live. Michelle tried to respond, her voice cutting into the noise: "You can't just declare yourself a leader by shouting the loudest. Leadership is about patience, wisdom." But Karoline sliced across her words, her voice carrying over the crowd. "No, Michelle. Leadership is about truth. And sometimes the truth doesn't whisper, it roars. Tonight it's roaring through this crowd. You can call it loud. You can call it reckless, but what you can't do anymore is ignore it." The camera zoomed in, catching Michelle's face stiffening, her jaw tightening as though she were physically bracing against Karoline's words. The former First Lady looked, for the first time, not regal or untouchable, but small, cornered by the force of someone who refused to bow. Commentators on social media framed it instantly: Michelle preached about respect. Karoline showed what it actually looks like. The split-screen coverage across networks made the contrast impossible to miss: Michelle defensive, Karoline commanding. By the time the moderator managed to step in, urging both women to calm the audience, the narrative was already set. The evening was no longer Michelle's carefully staged showcase. It was Karoline's battlefield, and she was winning. By the time the debate crossed into its final half-hour, the contrast between the two women had become impossible to ignore. Commentators on major networks leaned into their earpieces, whispering that the control room had already shifted the framing. Michelle, once assumed to dominate the stage, was now cast in the role of the embattled veteran, while Karoline emerged as the insurgent challenger who not only refused to yield but seized the moment with both hands. CNN's cheerin flickered at the bottom of the screen: "Clash over leadership, Karoline versus Michelle." On Fox, the headline cut even sharper: "Karoline stands tall against the princess claim." Social media, however, was the true battlefield, and it was already ablaze. TikTok clips of Karoline's line, "They don't want a princess. They don't want a queen. They want leaders who bleed with them," racked up millions of views within minutes. Twitter hashtags surged, hashtag no crown for Michelle and hashtag Karoline speaks truth. Michelle tried once more to reassert control, but her tone betrayed fatigue. "You think a few loud lines make you a leader," she said, her voice shaking ever so slightly. "I've lived leadership, I've worn the burdens, I've carried the expectations of a nation." Karoline didn't miss a beat. "And that's exactly the problem. You carried them as if they belonged to you alone. Leadership isn't about shouldering the nation's burdens like a crown, it's about sharing them with the people. You said you were America's princess. But I say America doesn't need royalty. It needs responsibility." The blow landed harder than anyone expected. Even those who admired Michelle's legacy couldn't deny the symbolic sting. The crowd's reaction was thunderous, raw, and uncontainable. Chants of "USA! USA!" broke out, not directed at Michelle, but swelling in support of Karoline, who stood unflinching in the face of the former First Lady's glare. Network analysts immediately began drafting their post-show coverage. One insider texted a colleague, "This wasn't just a debate, it was a coronation interrupted." Another commentator, usually cautious, tweeted live, "Michelle claimed a crown. Karoline took it off her head, in front of the nation." Michelle's eyes narrowed, her forced smile masking visible frustration. She tried to deliver a closing pivot, something rehearsed, something lofty, but every phrase seemed hollow after Karoline's thunderclap lines. It was as though the air had been sucked out of her words, leaving only echoes of a speech no longer relevant. Karoline, meanwhile, stood taller with each passing second, the energy of the audience feeding her resolve. The young congresswoman didn't just debate, she commanded. She wasn't merely defending herself against an icon, she was redefining the fight itself. And for millions watching at home, the message was clear. The so-called princess had met her match, and America had just witnessed a passing of the torch, not of privilege, but of power. The studio lights seemed hotter, heavier, as the debate drew to its final moments. Michelle Obama's gaze held steady, but her smile had thinned, the rehearsed charm unraveling under the weight of Karoline's relentless precision. Producers in the control booth signaled the moderator for closing statements, but it was already clear to everyone in the room, the night belonged to Karoline Leavitt. When the floor opened, Michelle stepped forward first, determined to salvage dignity. She spoke of unity, of her years in the White House, of the symbolism she claimed still defined her place in American life. The words were polished, no doubt drafted by a team of seasoned writers, but they felt strangely brittle, like a speech written for an audience that no longer existed. Applause was polite, obligatory, but faint. Then Karoline moved to the podium. She didn't shuffle papers or glance down at notes. She looked directly into the camera, into the living rooms of millions of Americans, and began in a voice steady as steel. "Tonight, you heard someone claim the title of America's Princess. But America is not a kingdom, and its people are not subjects. Our founders shed blood to break free of crowns and thrones. They wanted a republic, led by citizens, for citizens. And that's the America I stand for." The crowd erupted, their applause no longer restrained. Karoline let the energy settle before continuing. "I am not here to be worshipped. I am here to serve. To fight for our families, our workers, our veterans, and our future. If you want royalty, you can turn to Britain. But if you want liberty, you look to America, and you look to leaders who answer to the people, not themselves." Even Michelle, for a split second, blinked at the sheer clarity of the rebuke. It wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a dismantling of the very premise of Michelle's self-crowned identity. As Karoline closed, she leaned forward, her voice sharp as a blade. "America doesn't need a princess. America doesn't need a queen. What America needs, what America deserves, is truth. And no crown in the world can compete with that. The studio fell into thunderous applause. Even some audience members wearing pins that marked them as longtime Obama loyalists stood up, swept away by the force of the words. Camera operators swiveled, capturing the historic split screen, Michelle tight-lipped, her crown of rhetoric slipping, Karoline unbowed, standing as though she had just walked out of history itself. Within minutes, clips of Karoline's final statement exploded across every platform. Headlines rolled in, Leavitt dethrones the princess claim, Karoline's closing line shakes debate stage. On talk radio, callers poured in, praising the young congresswoman's fearlessness. By dawn, opinion polls showed a dramatic surge in Karoline's favor. And as the credits rolled on the network broadcast, one truth had crystallized: Michelle had entered the stage claiming a crown, but Karoline had left it shattered on the floor, her words echoing far beyond the studio, into the hearts of Americans who knew they had just witnessed a defining moment. Tonight wasn't just a debate, it was a battle of ideas. Michelle Obama stepped on stage trying to claim a crown, but America doesn't bow to crowns. Our nation was built on liberty, not royalty. And when Michelle declared herself a princess, Karoline Leavitt reminded her, and every American, that this country doesn't need a princess. It needs leaders who serve the people, not themselves. Karoline's words cut deeper than any title, and her courage resonated far beyond the studio. The message was clear: truth is stronger than image, principle is stronger than performance, and no crown can outshine the voice of the American people. What we saw tonight was more than a debate, it was a turning point. Michelle's claim to power crumbled, and Karoline proved that in America, the people write history, not the self-appointed elites.